Hi, I'm Geneva Kordakowski, and I'm reviewing the ebook Sustainable Learning Spaces: Design, Infrastructure, and Technology. I decided to read and review this book for two reasons. First, because it is an ebook and easily accessible from almost anywhere, and secondly, because the space design is something relevant to what my high school will be going through. I should mention that it is also free, so I felt that they wanted to readily share the information the text has to offer, so I was curious as to its usefulness. Currently, my school's library is undergoing transformation and looking for ideas, and this ebook, edited by Russell Carpenter, Richard Self, Sean Apostle, and Christy Apostle, ended up being useful in thinking about sustainability of a space. The book is organized into three sections: creating sustainable learning spaces, flexibility, sustainability, and the design of learning spaces, and environmental sustainability and learning space design. Each section contains 3 to 4 chapters, and each chapter is written by different authors on their campus's sustainable designs and learning spaces, such as classrooms and tutoring centers. The book looks at 3 stages: creating, reinventing, and sustaining. It then determines how each stage affects the composing process, teaching process, and the learning process. The first section, Creating a Sustainable Learning Space, was comprised of 4 chapters that delineated their plans for creating said spaces, how the construction happened, and then reflected on the spaces once it had been used. 2 large factors that were surprising to me was funding and the relationships with departments and programs for these spaces. It was interesting to see how some campuses have much more flexibility in their funding than others, like how Florida State University had very little to work with, and also how campuses had a variety of political action in the making of these spaces. Karen Head and Rebecca Burnett's chapter, Imagining It, Building It, Living It, Design and Development of the Communication Center, was one of the chapters which bluntly stated the politics involved in the creating of the space at Georgia Tech University. In the creating stage of Clow Commons, which is their learning space, the task force organized to figure out the mission of the Learning Center decided that the Communication Center was not a fix-it shop. Instead, it would focus on critical thinking and rhetoric, encouraging students to learn expert-like behaviors and strategies that are strengthened with regular practice. They mentioned that since the center was interdisciplinary, some departments viewed it as a remedy to their specific problems with students. Also, investment was an issue for the task force of Clow Commons, as again, some departments did not think it deserved space since it did not have space before. Head and Burnett also mentioned that in order for the space to sustain itself, it should also consider space for reflecting and revising, but they never addressed what a space would look like if it were to do that. Ultimately, Clow Commons acquired key space in the middle of campus in a prominent area right next to the other academic support labs to support learning. Throughout this chapter, furniture and layout design were crucial to these learning spaces, focusing on tables, chairs, moving walls, and of course, technology. First, committees had to decide what the centers were supposed to do and for whom in order to determine how to design these spaces. In Amy Edwards Patterson's chapter, Collaboration in New Spaces, One Room, One Summer, One 2-Year Technical College, she discusses how they incorporated feedback from IT, instructors, students, and others about what should be in the space, but also how technology would be sustained over time. Ultimately, they decided that each table was considered a learning pod, which included high technology, such as computers, iPads, and touchscreen smartboards, as well as low technology, including dry erase boards on wheels. As the instructors desired, there was no front of the room or separate instructor station, and due to the mobility of the furniture, the classroom could be transformed at any time to further promote sustainability. The second section, Sustainable Learning Spaces, Design, Infrastructure, and Technology, contained 3 chapters focusing on reinvention of current spaces, which included some campuses where they had to remodel and update high-tech spaces. A driving question that moved these campuses to reinvent their spaces was, what would the learning environment look like if it was the best we can make it? Ole McGrath's chapter, Within and Beyond Walls, Sustainability Implications of Educational Technology Infrastructure, also addressed sustainability regarding finances to improve technology by adding technology updates to the equipment refresh calendar as soon as that auditorium opened. This forward thinking of sustainability drove the University of California, Berkeley to consider how it would reinvent 3 rooms on campus in need of technology upgrades. The 3 rooms differed vastly from one another. One was a new auditorium in a science building, another an experimental classroom that was once considered high-tech as a video conferencing room, and finally a general classroom that was neglected in terms of technology. While most of the articles focused on how technology benefited the students sitting in the classroom, this chapter also delved into how the technology served the pedagogical needs of the teacher, which reciprocated the needs of the student. The large auditorium ended up being reinvented with AV equipment that could allow an instructor to provide his or her lectures online in short videos from MOOC courses to best serve students who could not physically be there. The experimental room spoke to sustainability the most with the university's good intentions. McGrath mentions that a less publicized aspect of the project, however, involved the quiet shedding of a previous next big thing that had been occupying the same room, an expensive, high-touch video teleconferencing classroom for distance education in exchange for a still high-tech room, but one that would last longer without following a technological trend. The third and final section, Environmental Sustainability and Learning Space Design, contained an eclectic grouping of chapters that centered around reducing e-waste, waste in general, and sustaining the created and reinvented space financially with training, staffing, and encouraging other stakeholders to join the conversation. The first 2 chapters offered insight into the importance of having representatives designated early in project development, training staff and instructors on new technologies, and how to market these learning spaces. The last chapter seemed almost out of place in comparison to the writing style of the previous 2 chapters and 2 sections, but it was the most intriguing to me. Christy and Sean Apostle's chapter, Designing Our Future, Sustaining Space and Encountering E-Waste, addressed K-12 schools and the lack of technology present in classrooms because of lack of resources, and also demands that we as a society become more responsible for our e-waste. In a colloquial and inviting tone, they claim that elementary-age children regularly have access to iPads and smartphones at home and in school. They're part of a generation of students who will rely less on computers than ever before. This stressed their point that the classroom incorporates these technologies when they can. Their suggestion is to use refurbished technologies, especially mobile devices such as smartphones and tablets, in the classroom to reduce e-waste with buying new technologies. Once the technology's second lifetimes are terminated, tablets, smartphones, and computers need to be recycled accordingly. Certifications for which computers have a recycling program are also discussed to give the reader options when deciding on what technology to purchase. I felt that there were a few lessons to be learned overall from the different chapters. Surprisingly, one thing that all studies mentioned when it was present was that whiteboards were always popular with students to the point that it was the most prized of all technologies in the learning spaces. Whiteboards mounted on walls, whiteboard tables, and whiteboard moving screens were all valued by students and their instructors. Natural lighting was also key in sustainability regarding ecology and economy. It saves energy, and students and staff remarked how the space was much more inviting when natural light was present. Lastly, a few chapters mentioned their wiring mishaps. Often it seemed as though architects and committees did not plan where and how the wires would connect equipment, so floor plans and technology had to be moved drastically at the last minute, sometimes altering the carefully laid design plans. Overall, I felt that this book was useful, and I especially liked the first-person narrative in some of the chapters. The theory and practice seemed accessible even at my level, and the reflections at the end of some chapters were especially helpful. At times, I wish that this was like the Reagan Library or a Kindle and that it would tell you how far along you were inside the text because it was difficult to judge where you were in it as a whole. However, for a free book, this can be overlooked. Lastly, the editor suggests that research remains to be done that will examine the role of sustainability in learning, composition, and communication space design, especially spaces that incorporate technology. This is impossible to argue with given the evidence on how often and how much technology changes and its effects on learning and teaching. If the editors chose to do a follow-up or even upgrade their ebook to include how technology and learning spaces have changed to sustain learning, teaching, and composing processes, I would definitely be interested in reading it.